I had no idea what was going on at the time and spent a lot of time doubting my husband. This was almost 10 years ago. I was in my 30s and had only recently married my husband. With my husband working so hard even before we married, I expected life with him to be difficult. But he never came home for so long that I felt alone. At first, I tried to let my husband relax at home during the rare times he will be at home. But my frustration grew. I became harsh with him every time I saw his face. My husband would try to soothe me, but if he saw that I was still unsatisfied, he started to ignore me. I wanted him to look at me, no matter how busy he was with his work, because we were married. This emotion got the best of me, and I couldn't look at my husband objectively any longer. Whenever I would pick a fight with my husband, he would always say, "I'm going to settle down soon, and then we'll go to that island you like." But this never came true. "Work is more important than me, isn't it?" I said. "If so, don't force yourself to come home. I'm tired too, and seeing you so exhausted makes me sad." No matter how many horrible things I said to him, he never took it seriously, and I began to have a nagging feeling that our marriage was coming to an end. Soon after, my husband could tell I wasn't even mad at him and had no feelings for him. I didn't suspect it at first because he worked in a department with many business trips. But one day, I found a receipt and membership card for a hotel near our house in his suit pocket after he came home from a business trip. The receipt indicated that he had stayed at the hotel on a day when he was out of town on a business trip, and he had accumulated points for more than one night. As a successful businessman who could get the job done, my husband was quite popular with the ladies at work. I guessed that he had found another woman to be with. Why should I have a hard time when he is enjoying being with another woman? I went out at night in spite of my husband's infidelity and made plans on the weekends too. It was fun for a while, but eventually I grew tired. I was tired of forcing myself to smile and not being able to truly enjoy myself. Perhaps it was finally time for my husband and I to be free. We're both avoiding each other, not facing each other as husband and wife. It would be preferable if my husband was happier with someone other than me. I suppose it's time for me to move on to the next chapter of my life. But this is the husband I used to love until I realized I didn't want to spend the rest of my life with him. It took a lot of guts for me to ask for a divorce. I also wondered if there was really no other option but to call it quits. But it seems that my husband has a new girlfriend. After days of deliberation, I made a decision and sent a text message to my husband's cell phone. "Will you come home early today? I need to talk to you." I texted him on his cell phone. "I need to talk to you too, and I'll try to leave as soon as possible." He replied right away. I found myself thinking that my husband must not want a divorce, even though I was certain I had made my decision. My husband is also seeking a divorce. Just thinking about it made my heart race so fast that I couldn't breathe and I struggled to stand. My husband's heart was not with me, it went to someone else. Let's not cry anymore. At the very least, I should end things with a smile. I made my decision and waited for my husband to return home. It was shortly after 9 p.m. when my husband returned home. He'd lost an unexpected amount of weight. His kind eyes and tone of voice remained the same, but there was a gap between us that seemed insurmountable. My husband, who had never been a man of many words, kept looking down and remained silent except for a few words while I spoke. I wanted to end the conversation with my husband in a respectful manner because I felt he was making a lot of fun of me. We were a married couple, albeit for a short time, and we were about to divorce. So why wouldn't he tell me how he felt? I became increasingly angry and began to argue with him. However, my husband remained silent and listened to what I had to say. I wanted him to say something, so I told him that I knew about his new girlfriend. He probably thought I was oblivious to the fact. If he knew I knew everything, he would become impatient and make one excuse after another. Hearing my words, my husband looked at me in surprise, then smiled briefly. After a brief pause, he asked, "What, you knew?" I said. Strangely, I couldn't help but laugh at his joking tone, which made my husband laugh. And for the first time in a long time, we laughed together. Regardless of the topic of the conversation, I was overjoyed to be able to laugh with my husband like we used to. We were able to talk again after that, which was a strange sensation. Perhaps it was because he found out I knew about the affair. My husband's face appeared to be revitalized. "Let's stop attacking each other. I don't want to leave you because I don't like you," he said. My husband agreed to my proposal, and we decided to clean our room and share our belongings so that we could leave at any time. They were all precious memories, but they were all things I wanted to keep hidden for a while. My husband has always been the type of person who uses things he's had for years, but today he hadn't hesitated to throw them away. His grace overwhelmed me even more. "Take anything you want, it's all my fault. So this is my atonement," he said when the room was clean and tidy and we only had each other's belongings. My husband's eyes seemed to well up with tears as he said this. Did he feel sad as he cleaned up the mess? That was very clear to me because I felt the same way. You still have time to think about it, don't you? Let's clean up one step at a time. I decided to take a break for the rest of the day after cleaning up the entire mess. I took a bath to clear my mind. I should be able to get compensation for my unfaithful husband, but it was clear that our relationship had already ended. Besides, I don't want to taint my memories of my husband any further. As I was getting ready for bed after the bath, my husband entered the bedroom. He climbed into bed and gently drew me into his arms. "Hey, this is weird, and I feel bad for your girlfriend," I said. My husband said quietly, "Just one more time, I want to be by your side." I stiffened slightly. He was trembling as he wrapped his arms around me. "Are you crying?" I asked him, but he didn't respond. I noticed that his body was lighter and more bony as I stroked his back. "Are you sure you're well? You appear to have shed some pounds." When I said this to him, his body stopped shaking. "I've been cutting weight," he said, pulling his body away from mine, taking a deep breath. "Okay, is there anything else I should know? Are you sure you're okay?" It had been a long time since I had touched my husband's body, and I was surprised to see how different it looked from before. My husband's physique was always stocky and muscular. Even when he was busy, he enjoyed working out, but he told me, "She likes me like this." I was sad once more. He's doing it for her. Why doesn't he just forget about me if he enjoys being with her so much that he loses weight? I see. Then there's no need to cry because it's the last day. Or is it tears of joy? To keep my sadness at bay, I said something sarcastic that I didn't need to say. "You're still the same. I like that part of you too. I wish you a happy life from tomorrow. I'll be praying for you wherever you are," my husband said lightly. After saying that, my husband began to snore. He was a man who moved at his own pace until the end. I hope so as well. I fell asleep after murmuring to his sleeping face. I overslept the next day because I had stayed up late cleaning up the room the day before. My husband was no longer in bed when I awoke. When I entered the living room, I noticed an A4-size envelope on the table, and when I opened it, I discovered a bank book and a slew of documents inside. When I removed everything, I discovered that it was related to our marital property. There was also an unusually large sum of money in the bank book in my name. And I discovered the divorce papers in a small envelope. My husband's section had already been filled, so all that remained was for me to complete and submit mine. In a panic, I dialed my husband's cell phone, but it was disconnected because it appeared to have been canceled. I spent several days asking about my husband's whereabouts with his parents and friends, but none of them would tell me. I had no choice but to contact his company, where I discovered that my husband, that workaholic, had resigned a few months before. It would have made sense if he made a new girlfriend and left, but why go to such length? Why didn't anyone tell me anything? I've grown suspicious of people, and there appears to be no way to contact my husband. The mental fatigue that had been building up since before the divorce nearly crushed me. My husband had gone to the trouble of arranging compensation for me, and now that I was free, I decided to spend some time in a place I really enjoyed. We arrived at the remote island, which took nearly a day to reach from the mainland. The island was depopulated and about 3,000 people lived there. I had visited the island once with my husband and was captivated by its natural beauty and the slow flow of time. My husband promised that we would return to the island once his work was completed. I miss my husband, but maybe what I need now is the peace and quiet of that place. I quit my job and moved to this remote island a few months later after renting the house to someone else. It was a risky move on my part, but I knew I couldn't stay in my house any longer. I'm not sure how my husband paid off the mortgage, but I know he worked very hard. But there were too many memories to keep living alone in the house. However, I didn't want to waste my husband's efforts, so I didn't want to just let it go. There are many strange things, but I can't ask my husband about them anymore. I plan to spend time on his quiet island, relaxing and letting myself go. I began to adjust to island life and became acquainted with my neighbors. I had enough assets to live a normal life without working, but I realized that doing nothing was even more depressing. So I started working as a sort of helper, assisting the elderly neighbors with their problems. I was initially treated as an outsider, but as I became more used to the work, I was relieved to be accepted as one of the islanders. As I was settling in, I learned from a coworker that a new client had arrived from the main island for medical treatment. He had become ill and had chosen this island as his final residence because there was no treatment available. Moving to this island with no medical facilities would be difficult, unless you're very prepared to move to this island in that condition. I was thinking that being in charge would be difficult when the new client asked for a visit, and I was the only one free. I had heard about his medical condition, so I was nervous as I went to his house. We arrived at a small house on a hill with a view of the ocean. The house had been vacant for a long time and had been renovated to the point where it was livable, but it was really just enough to keep the wind and rain out. I questioned whether this was the best place for him to spend his final days. With concern, I rang the doorbell. "Come in," a small voice said, barely audible. I gave my usual greeting and entered. I found my client sitting in front of a window, the sun and wind streaming in. I couldn't see his face because it was backlit, so I squinted as I approached. "It's a pleasure to meet you today, sir." As I looked at the face that had turned to me, I was speechless. My ex-husband sat there. We were both taken aback. We just stood there staring. My husband initiated the conversation. "You found me out," he said. He was mischievously smiling, like before. "What exactly are you doing here?" I was so confused by my husband's presence, the fact that he wasn't supposed to be there, as well as the information I had heard at work, that I couldn't speak properly. My husband grabbed my hand and forced me to sit next to him. He sat next to me and held my hand until I relaxed. I couldn't think of anything to say to him, and as I sat there, I heard a voice at the door. I wiped my tears and opened the door, where an elderly man stood. He seemed surprised to see my tear-stained face, but he bowed, went inside, and sat down next to my husband. "How are you doing today?" he inquired. He spoke in a soft voice. My husband said that there was nothing unusual and began chatting with him. The elderly man was most likely the island's only doctor. I remembered my colleagues telling me that there were no inpatient facilities on the island and that the clinic nurse and doctor were the island's lifelines. So it appears that my husband came to the island to spend his final days here. Although it was his decision, I listened intently to their conversation. I was wondering if there was anything I could do to help. My husband's doctor left after about 10 minutes of casual conversation. I couldn't help myself and ran after him. I guess my flustered appearance startled him again, but when I told him of our relationship, he seemed to understand. I questioned the doctor about my husband's condition and future treatment, but he said, "I can't tell you without his consent." Maybe he felt sorry for me and said, "He won't be able to walk by himself very soon. It seemed a shame for him to spend his final days alone, so please be there for him." I was stunned. What became of my husband's girlfriend? I returned back to the house with heavy steps, where my husband was waiting. My husband appeared to have anticipated my questioning the doctor and greeted me with a smile. "You're back." I couldn't leave without my husband, so I asked him to let me spend the night. My husband's house was only a few pieces of luggage and a couple of futons. It was the first time I'd slept with my husband since we discussed divorce. As I cuddled up under the covers with my husband, we told each other how we got here. I was eager to ask about his illness, but I decided that it wasn't time to talk about painful topics, so we reminisced. This was also due to my feelings about his relationship with her. I asked him if he hadn't brought her to the island before I asked to stay, but he just laughed and covered it up. The fact that he didn't say anything suggested that there was a sad event. I was careful not to hurt his feelings by asking any more questions. The next day, I informed my employer of what had occurred and decided to take some time off. I want to spend what time my husband had with him. I took my husband, who couldn't walk very far, around the island in a wheelchair. There were places I remembered from my previous visit, places and scenery I wanted to show him for the first time. It was satisfying just being together. I wish we'd been this close when we were married. Even after my divorce, I discovered that the feelings I had grew stronger. But there's nothing I could do about it now. My husband would be confused if I told him. Like friends, I would stay by his side. The good times were fleeting, but the disease was gradually taking its toll on my husband. His physical strength had deteriorated to the point where he could no longer go out or even take the long-awaited walks. Even daily tasks became difficult, and he began to doze off and fall asleep more frequently. The doctor came to see him every day, but the only relief was that he was no longer in pain, and I couldn't believe that this was natural and that he would leave me so soon. I nursed my husband, never leaving his side for a second, so he wouldn't be alone when he awoke, which could happen at any time. Sometimes he'd wake up and tell me the rest of the dream he just awoke from, and other times he'd tell me about long-ago memories as if they just happened. I loved every moment, and this love exacerbated my sadness. My husband gradually stopped waking up after that. When we stopped talking, I stayed by his side, reading his favorite books and telling him about the sights and sounds I'd missed so he could understand. I wanted to tell him about a beautiful sunset one day, so I held his hand and tried to speak to him. My husband's hand was cold to the touch. He was barely breathing, and his chest moved in an unnatural way. I panicked and called the doctor, who said he would be there right away. I waited for him, feeling as if my heart was being ripped out of my chest by the out-of-control situation. I hoped it was a misunderstanding. I wanted him to reassure me that everything would be fine. However, when the doctor arrived, he took a look and said, "His blood pressure has already dropped quite a bit. Let him go in peace. I believe he wants you to stay with him, so I'll sit this one out. Don't worry, I'll be right there if anything happens, so please stay by his side." The doctor then said goodbye to my husband and walked out. So the time has come. I knew it would come, but it was unbearable. I was delighted to have met you. There were some challenges, but the truth is that I adore you. I held my husband's hand and whispered in his ear. Then my husband gently squeezed my hand back. It was medically impossible, but I clearly felt it. Soon after, he took his last breath and died quietly. I couldn't stop crying, but I was glad to have been there for him at the end. I was so busy after he had died that I didn't have time to mourn until after the burial. When I finally got home after cleaning up my husband's belongings, I noticed that mail had accumulated like a mountain. I was struck by the nostalgic handwriting I discovered as I went through them one by one. My husband had written dozens of letters. I wondered how long it had been since I had spent every day with him, trying to keep as close to him as possible. His letters started on the day of our reunion. My husband had moved here in the hope of seeing me again, but he didn't expect to actually find me here. It was difficult for him not to notice how surprised and delighted he was, it read. I couldn't stop laughing at how funny my husband's letters were. And the fact that my husband felt that way was the best compliment he could have given me. The date on the letter indicated that he had been posting it every day, but his handwriting became more dirty and the length of the letter became shorter as the days passed, clearly demonstrating the progression of his illness. With sadness, I continued reading, but my eyes stopped at one point. He had written the truth about our divorce. My husband's illness started during our marriage. When he discovered it, there was nothing they could do to help him, and the treatment he received as his last hope was ineffective and only had side effects. My husband made plans to divorce me because he didn't want me to spend the rest of my life with this disease, and I fell right into his trap. He had no idea I'd suspect the existence of another woman, but he didn't deny it because he thought he could give a lot of money to me as compensation. Because I no longer required medical treatment, I wanted to liquidate all of my assets so that you could live freely, he wrote. What hurtful words I'd hurled at my husband, who had thought that far from me. I sincerely apologized. Tears flowed uncontrollably. Then there was a knock on the front door. I wiped my tears quickly and opened the door to find my doctor standing there. "What brings you here, doctor?" I inquired. When I asked, he handed me a sealed envelope. The envelope was identical to the one I had just read from my husband. He asked me to post it every day. He wrote a few days' worth of letters before he fell into a coma, and he entrusted them to me. I couldn't refuse, and this is the last letter. He asked me to give it to you when you return to your home. So that's what this was about. This was my husband's final letter. I thanked the doctor and read my husband's letter alone. When I opened it quietly and calmly, I found a thin but clear note that said, "Thank you, I love you." We had come so far, but our hearts remained connected. I love you too. When I said this, I thought that I saw my husband's portrait's mouth smile a little. I am still living on this island, decades after my husband died. I am now officially recognized as an island resident. I built a grave next to where my husband's house used to stand, the day I was sure I'd never leave the island. My husband used to look out the window every day, and I'm sure he still does. I intend to join him there one day, and I am at peace and very happy to be surrounded by memories of my husband. Thank you for sticking with me until the end. I'll see you in the next video.
Made money off your clothes? Complain when you can make $4K a month. As a stay-at-home mom, I've been putting up with my husband and mother-in-law's atrocious attitude for too long. But no way I could let this slide. Fine, let's revisit this in a month. Fuming, I stormed out of my in-laws' home. Then I made a phone call to a special number. A month later, just remembering the look on my husband's face makes me burst into laughter. My name is Emma. I'm a freelance fashion designer. I used to work for a corporate design firm, but I've gone solo. The fashion industry is fiercely competitive, and freelancing has been tougher than I thought. With more freedom comes a higher chance of failing, and I often get yelled at for not meeting clients' expectations. Still, I loved my job, and that made it all worthwhile. My stubborn nature probably played a role in my success. I took setbacks in stride and fully devoted myself to my work. I still remember that time vividly. I studied hard, got my color coordinator license, and brushed up my social media skills. I wanted to cry at times, and I did. But I persevered. Still, with the support of people who encouraged me, I desperately worked hard. I kept pushing myself, pushing and pushing. As a result, now I can earn a decent income from this profession. I was enjoying life as a fashion designer, but recently something started to bother me, and that was, "Don't you think it's about time to settle down with someone nice?" Absolutely. I've always been a career-first person. Before I knew it, I was already in my early 30s. Work was so fulfilling that I barely noticed time passing. But yes, life's milestones were approaching. Marriage isn't a big deal. I used to laugh it off like that at first, but as I watched my friends, one by one, tie the knot, that's how I ended up marrying Noah, a guy I met at work. Noah is in the apparel business, a go-getter, and a real stand-up guy. It's probably thanks to his personality that things went smoothly all the way to the altar. So, Noah, about future work plans.
Don't worry. You can take the lead on home stuff.
So we decided I'd step back from my designer career for a bit. It's the division of labor thing, you know? That's why I've been really going all in on being a homemaker. As for going back to design work, I was thinking of picking it back up once things settled down a bit at home. Anyway, that was the new chapter in my life. I was living each day filled with dreams and hopes. Then, one day, Noah's dad passed away. His father had been battling cancer for a while, so it was just a matter of time. Still, his mom, Olivia, is really struggling with the loss of her long-term partner.
Mom's really taking it hard.
If she collapsed from the grief, it would be unbearable. So we decided to temporarily move into my in-laws' home. Luckily, their home is spacious, with a separate guest house. We would live there and take care of Olivia, who was in the main house.
Mom, if you need anything, don't hesitate to call on us.
Olivia, lunch is ready. So I took on the chores in the main house too, and kept Olivia company. Our dedication seemed to be helping. She was getting better day by day. I thought she'll be okay on her own soon. I was relieved and thinking of resuming my design work. But then, "Emma, have you finished cleaning the main house yet?" My mother-in-law just never seemed to pick up her share of the housework. Instead, she'd dump it all on me and go about her lazy days. And she never missed a chance to complain. "The food is bland. You don't do laundry properly." She'd nag over and over. At first, I reluctantly went along with her. But this felt like servitude, and I couldn't stand it any longer. I have my own work to do. I explained to her that I was busy with my design work, and asked her to handle the house chores for the main house. But then, "You're busy. All you're doing is sitting in your room drawing." She wouldn't hear of it. To her, my work on the computer or social media seemed like playtime. I tried to explain further, but, "Don't think you can fool me with those big words. My, aren't you cunning?" She dismissed me with a wave of her hand. If I pushed any harder, she'd just shout, calling me a domineering wife. So there was nothing I could do but back off. Now what should I do? I talked to my husband about his mom, but he didn't seem to take it seriously. It seems he's also having a hard time at work. He sighs all the time, whether we're eating or bathing. Of course, as his wife, I tried to offer a listening ear. Sometimes venting can be a relief. However, Noah didn't open up to me about the details.
Don't worry, I'll figure out the work situation on my end.
Certainly it must be a matter of pride for Noah. I was left to manage the difficult life with my mother-in-law without any help from my husband. Then one day, Noah comes home with a particularly dark expression. Turns out he'd made a big mistake at work and lost an opportunity for a promotion. Mistakes happen at work. Don't beat yourself up over it. I thought I was giving him a normal pep talk, but it backfired with Noah, who has quite the ego.
What would a homemaker like you know?
My husband said, clearly irritated. Then my mother-in-law jumped on the bandwagon, blaming me as well. Don't you think Noah's failure is because you're not supportive enough at home? At their remarks, I'm momentarily stunned. No, this is definitely strange. Stunned by their accusations, I naturally fought back. But my words fell on deaf ears. It was decided then and there, I was the bad guy. From that day on, I was treated noticeably colder by both my husband and mother-in-law. Emma, can you hurry up with dinner? Emma, you were supposed to take care of the garden, remember? Emma, go buy some flowers for the living room. My mother-in-law became even more demanding, bossing me around. No matter how flawlessly I took care of the household chores, she'd always find something to complain about. Emma, you're sloppy with the cutting and the seasoning. It's too strong. Emma, I don't like how the garden looks. Redo it, please. Emma, these are lilies. I wanted gerberas. At this point, all I could do was sigh. I just wish someone would acknowledge my hard work. I tried talking to Noah again, but all he did was defend his mother.
She's old, and she's relying on you. Besides, you have plenty of time, don't you? You're not working after all.
Noah still seemed resentful. I knew he had a big ego, but I didn't expect him to be this petty. And so, drained and weary, I soldiered on alone in my in-laws' home. Then one day something happened that I simply couldn't tolerate any longer. That day I had to go into town for some errands. After wrapping things up, I returned home. But the moment I opened my closet, I was shocked. What? Where are my clothes? Yes, almost all my clothes were missing. I rushed to the main house to confront my mother-in-law, who was leisurely sipping her coffee. Oh, I sold your clothes. My mother-in-law casually admitted her deed. She said she sold them to a resale shop to help with the family finances. I was furious, more than furious. Those weren't just fashionable clothes. They were designs I had worked hard on, bringing them to life through my labor. Some were even from the early days of my career. Seriously, who sells someone else's stuff without asking? I couldn't believe it. I let loose on her with all my feelings. But who needs fancy clothes when they're unemployed? There was zero remorse from her. And my husband, who had come running after hearing the commotion, was no help either.
If you have complaints, try earning $4,000 a month.
With that, Noah and my mother-in-law both mocked me. I responded, trying my best to stay calm. Fine, check back in a month. Both were stunned by my unexpected answer. Ignoring them, I got ready and left my in-laws' house. I plan to live in a hotel for a while. The room is small, but it feels much more spacious than my in-laws' home. This must be what freedom feels like. I lay on the bed and casually checked my phone. Several calls and messages from my husband and mother-in-law. Of course, I ignored all of them. Ugh, what a day. I tossed my phone on the bed with an exasperated look, but after a few seconds, I had second thoughts and picked it back up. I dialed a number. A month had passed since then. Right now, there's a big fashion show happening at the city's event hall. It's a collaborative effort between renowned fashion designers and popular models, and not just open to the public. Various industry insiders are also in attendance. I'm participating as a fledgling designer myself.
Emma, long time no see.
Emma, thank you for your help the other time.
Emma, you look well. That's great to hear.
Since many people from this field are gathered, I see a lot of familiar faces. I make my rounds and engage in lively conversation with people I've worked with before. Aiden, long time no see. Amelia, I should be thanking you for your help last time. Lucas, you're looking well too. Is Sophia in elementary school now? What a pleasant time this is. There was no shortage of interesting topics, including recent trends and industry developments. But then, someone rudely pats my shoulder.
Ah, you're here too.
I turn around and see my husband.
So, have you come to your senses yet? You're stubborn, you know. At least respond. How about admitting defeat and coming home?
Noah hasn't changed. Those were his words to his wife he hasn't seen in a month. I was so dumbfounded, I couldn't even find the words. I was brushing Noah off when a man rushes over to us.
Do you two know each other? Director Henry.
Director Henry is one of the higher-ups at the apparel company where Noah works.
Yes, she's actually, embarrassingly enough, my wife. She's so uppity. Even though she's unemployed, it's really becoming a problem.
With those words, Noah snickers. At that moment, Henry turns red and shoots Noah a glare.
Emma, I apologize for my employee's inexcusable behavior.
Henry, it's all right. Noah is watching our exchange, mouth agape. The truth is, Henry and I are acquainted. I had collaborated with my husband's company during my freelancing days, and Henry was the one managing the project. And now my husband is about to learn another shocking fact from Director Henry.
Emma is a renowned fashion designer. Don't you even know that about your own wife?
What? Noah looks at me with astonishment. Yes, I used to be a well-known designer in the industry, not to brag, but I was pretty popular on social media before I got married. Back then, I was pulling in tens of thousands of dollars a month, including ad revenue from social media. I kept that a secret from Noah. There never seemed to be a good time to tell him, and I didn't want to be valued just for my financial worth, so he probably thought I was just a mediocre independent designer. Sure enough, Noah starts to make a scene after learning about my background.
I didn't know this about you.
Well, I never told you. I had recently resumed my design activities, thanks in part to our recent argument. I contributed several designs to this event. I had been approached for collaboration before. The day my clothes were thrown away, I was meeting Matthew, my former boss, during my corporate design days. Apparently, one of their designers had fallen ill. That's when Matthew urgently asked me to take over as the lead designer for the fashion show. I had been hesitant since I had paused my design career. There was also the matter of issues at my in-laws' home. But then, the big moment came. I called Matthew from the hotel to say I was on board and ready to go.
You, being just a homemaker and unemployed.
I could hear Noah's pride crumbling. I retorted with as much sarcasm as I could muster. So, we're good at $40,000 a month, right? Soon after, I divorced Noah.
Emma, I messed up. Let's try again.
You're the worst kind of woman for leaving your husband. Heartless, cowardly. Noah pleaded while my mother-in-law cursed me out. I dismissed them both. Come talk to me when you're making $40,000 a month. Since then, I haven't seen Noah and his clan. From what I hear, Noah got demoted to a smaller department. He must have irked the higher-ups in the company. According to Mr. Jones, even previous work mistakes were due to conflicts with colleagues. Judging as lacking any remorse, he's been completely written off. They're still living in that house, as they seem far from happy. I passed by their home once. It had a defeated aura. Well, they had it coming. As for me, I was recently in the spotlight again at a fashion show. My career as a designer is thriving. And life is busy but fun. By the way, things are going well between me and my former boss, Matthew. Matthew is a great guy who massively supported me when I struck out on my own. I trust him as a partner. I should have honed not just my design sense, but also my man-picking skills. I chuckled at the thought as I focused on my work.